The first time I heard a knock on my cabin door, I figured it was a delivery. What I got instead was a furious middle-aged woman with a clipboard, a tight bun that looked painful, and the kind of attitude that made you instinctively step back. "You're in violation," she barked before I could even say hello. "Violation of what?" I asked, still holding my coffee, wearing flannel pants and socks with holes. I wasn't prepared for a fight that morning. She squinted at me like I was the human equivalent of mildew. "Of the Pinebrooke Lakeside HOA regulations. You're not allowed to reside full-time on this property." "My name's Levi Madsen," I said slowly, "and this is my land. Cabin's been here since '92. I've lived here peacefully for years." "Never signed up for an HOA." Her lips tightened like she'd bitten a lemon. "I'm Sharon Aller, president of the Pinebrooke Lakeside Homeowners Association, and your cabin falls within our jurisdiction now. We expanded last fall." "You can't just expand onto someone else's land," I said. She shoved the clipboard toward me. "You'll find our updated map clearly shows your parcel inside HOA boundaries. You have 30 days to vacate or face fines and legal action." I didn't take the clipboard. "I'll see you in court before I hand over the keys to my own cabin to a bunch of clipboard tyrants." She stormed off, her SUV's tires spitting gravel as she tore down the dirt path. I stood there, heart pounding. I wasn't the type to pick fights, but I wasn't about to let some HOA queen evict me from the place I'd built up with my own 2 hands. I spent the next week digging through every file I had. Original deed, county land surveys, a hand-drawn map from my uncle who first built the place. Everything pointed to the same conclusion: my land wasn't part of anything except the county. Then came the letters. Thick envelopes stuffed with fines. One for unauthorized firewood storage. Another for non-approved exterior color. They even tried to fine me for not having an HOA-approved mailbox. I didn't even have a mailbox. I picked up my mail at the general store 10 miles down the road. Sharon showed up again a few days later, this time with 2 other HOA board members, one tiny guy who looked like a nervous squirrel and another woman who kept snapping photos of my cabin like I was a crime scene. "You're still here," Sharon snapped. "Yes," I said. "And I'll still be here next month," she clicked her tongue. "Then we'll let the judge settle this. You'll be served officially next week." I watched her walk away again, but this time I smiled. Because while she was busy printing off fake maps and dreaming of power, I had already contacted a land use attorney. And what we found in the county records wasn't just good, it was explosive. The official summons arrived wrapped in Arrogance certified mail, thick envelope, gold letterhead seal from the Pinebrooke Lakeside HOA legal department. Inside was a lawsuit alleging trespass, nuisance, and most absurd of all, willful noncompliance with community standards. They were suing me for living on my own land. I drove straight to my attorney's office that afternoon. His name was Benji Ortega, former assistant DA, now private land use attorney, and the kind of guy who kept a rolled-up county zoning map in his umbrella stand for fun. He thumbed through the complaint, expression flat. "They're bluffing," he said, flipping to the back page. "But they're also stupid enough to believe their bluff. They're trying to snowball me with fake boundaries," I said. "But we've got the 2003 county plat, the 1978 easement, and the 1991 land trust filing. That's triple-locked title protection." Benji leaned back, hands behind his head. "They filed this in county civil court. Judge works on rotation. He's not fond of HOAs, especially since one tried to fine him for parking his boat in his own driveway last year." Court was set for the following Monday. I spent the weekend documenting every inch of my property with time-stamped drone footage, pulled utility records back to the 90s, and highlighted every discrepancy between the HOA's revised boundary map and the official county GIS records. I even had a notarized statement from the county surveyor confirming my parcel was never annexed. When I walked into the courtroom, Sharon was already seated at the plaintiff's table, flanked by her 2 board members and a man in a cheap suit who was probably their lawyer. They all wore matching navy jackets with the Pinebrooke Lakeside crest stitched over the breast pocket. It looked more like a cult than a community association. Judge Rourke didn't waste time. "This is case number 427 CV91, Pinebrooke Lakeside HOA versus Levi Madsen. Plaintiff, you're up." Sharon stood, cleared her throat, and launched into a speech about protecting community integrity, preserving uniform standards, and ensuring compliant residency. She sounded like she was giving a TED talk about dictatorship. When it was my turn, Benji stood and walked up with a single document, an enlarged parcel map from the county registrar's office, stamped and verified. He placed it on the easel. "Your Honor, this is the official 2023 county land use map, updated annually." "This is Mr. Madsen's parcel," he said, tapping the highlighted plot. "And this," he pointed to the bold blue line several feet away, "is the legal boundary of the Pinebrooke Lakeside HOA. As you can see, the two do not overlap. There is no encroachment, annexation, or any instrument recorded with the clerk to suggest otherwise." The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "And the plaintiff is claiming they expanded their jurisdiction without a recorded amendment." Sharon shot to her feet. "We voted to extend the boundary at our September board meeting. It passed unanimously, Your Honor. Did you notify the county zoning board? We didn't think we had to. It was internal." The judge pinched the bridge of his nose. "Miss Aller, you don't get to redraw legal boundaries by committee vote. This isn't a monopoly game." Benji handed over a second document. "Moreover, Your Honor, we discovered that the HOA's submitted map was not only inaccurate, it was falsified. The digital signature of the county registrar on their document doesn't match official records. We had it verified with the clerk's office this morning." The courtroom fell silent. Sharon's lawyer paled. Rourke's voice dropped an octave. "You submitted forged documents to this court," Sharon stammered. "It was a mistake. Our intern compiled the map. In that case," the judge interrupted, "I'm ordering a full audit of Pinebrooke Lakeside HOA, all filings, all maps, and all collected dues. If you're forging boundary maps to extort non-members, there are criminal implications." I could see the color drain from Sharon's face. Her lawyer leaned over, whispering furiously. Whatever he said, it didn't help. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Madsen, you're under no obligation to comply with any demands from this HOA. Your land is not within their jurisdiction. This case is dismissed with prejudice." Then he turned back to Sharon. "And I'm issuing a temporary injunction against the Pinebrooke Lakeside HOA from enforcing any fines or fees until this audit is complete. Bailiff, please escort a notice to the county attorney's office. We may be looking at fraud." Outside the courtroom, Sharon tried to intercept me. "This doesn't change anything," she hissed. "You're still disrupting the uniformity of the lakeside community. You're bringing down property values." I didn't break stride. "You just tried to steal land using forged documents. You should be worried about bail, not property values." Benji caught up with me near the parking lot. "You know," he said, "once the audit starts turning up discrepancies, they'll start pointing fingers. Those board members looked like they'd flip for a sandwich." He was right. Within 2 weeks, the county attorney launched a formal investigation. Turns out, the HOA had been collecting dues from at least 6 other properties that weren't legally under their control. One of those homeowners was a retired Air Force colonel who'd been fined nearly $2,000 for a flagpole he installed himself. The audit uncovered even more: unregistered architectural fees, unapproved surveillance cameras installed on public easements, and falsified landscaping citations that conveniently targeted residents who had previously voted against board proposals. It was a racket disguised as a neighborhood committee. The county held a public hearing 3 weeks later. Sharon showed up with a binder full of excuses and a new lawyer. Neither helped. The county attorney recommended immediate dissolution of the HOA, citing fraudulent activity, abuse of authority, and deliberate misrepresentation of legal boundaries. A motion passed to dissolve the Pinebrooke Lakeside HOA entirely. Their charter was revoked, their funds frozen, and a criminal investigation was opened into the board's actions. Back at my cabin, things finally quieted down. The mailbox I never installed remained exactly where it wasn't. The woodpile sat untouched, and my porch light glowed freely without needing board approval. One afternoon, the retired colonel came by with a cooler of beer and a grin that said he'd been waiting for this moment a long time. He cracked one open and handed it to me. "You didn't just beat them," he said. "You buried them." I raised my bottle. "To forged maps and overplayed hands," he laughed. "And to land that still belongs to the people who actually earned it." The audit had barely cooled when the real fallout began to unfold, quiet at first, like a distant storm rolling in across the lake, but soon crashing through the neighborhood with the force of a hurricane. 2 days after the final court ruling, I got a visit from Deputy Monroe. He pulled up in his cruiser just as I was finishing repairs on the west-facing window shutters. The man had the gait of someone with heavy news and no desire to deliver it. "Levi," he greeted, pulling off his cap. "You got a minute?" I nodded and set the drill aside, brushing sawdust off my sleeves. "Let me guess, Sharon's back with a new costume and a different lie. I wish it were that simple," he muttered, glancing toward the woods. County investigators found something ugly buried in the HOA's financials. "You ever hear of the name Thomas Clary?" The name rang no bell. "Thought not," he said. "Clary owned a plot 2 ridges over. Property sat untouched for years. No house, no utilities, just fenced land. Turns out he passed away 6 years ago. No next of kin, no will. County was supposed to take possession and auction it off." He paused, as if waiting for the moment to land. "Only it never made it to auction. Sharon filed a quitclaim deed, claiming Clary sold her the land 2 months before his death. But county records show he was already hospitalized and legally incapacitated at the time. The signature doesn't match his old filings." I stared at him, trying to process the weight of it. "You're saying she forged a deed to steal a dead man's land?" "That's what the DA's office thinks," he confirmed. "And that's not all. She'd been leasing the property to a landscaping contractor who's been dumping cleared brush from HOA lots onto it for years illegally, and charging disposal fees to the HOA budget. She was paying herself," I said flatly. "Exactly, and she was billing the HOA 3 times the going rate. That explained the sudden expansion of maintenance assessments that had blindsided homeowners the previous winter." I'd heard whispers of rising fees, but hadn't realized the full extent of the graft. "What happens now?" I asked. "We've got Sharon and her treasurer under investigation for property fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying county documents. County assessor froze all the HOA accounts. They're bringing in a forensic accountant from the state. This thing's deeper than anyone thought." He looked toward the distant ridge. "You were the first to push back. If you hadn't fought this, it'd still be going." That night, I opened a bottle of rye I'd saved for emergencies. It wasn't celebration, it was reflection. I sat out on the back porch, watching the horizon fade to black while the frogs chirped like they didn't care who forged what. Out here, the land hadn't changed, but the people around it had. The next morning, I was awoken by an unexpected knock. Not a clipboard this time, just a soft tap. When I opened the door, a tall, wiry man in a flannel coat stood holding a stack of documents. "Levi Madsen?" he asked. "Depends who's asking." He extended a hand. "Name's Curtis Langley. I'm an investigator with the state licensing board." "Mind if we talk?" I stepped aside and motioned him in. He laid out his documents on the table without ceremony. "Sharon Aller held a real estate license for 23 years, he said. "She used her position to broker sales inside the HOA unlicensed, off-record transactions. We've got evidence she pushed elderly residents into selling under market value, then flipped the homes to friends or family members tied to the board." I leaned against the counter. "So this wasn't just about control, it was profit." He nodded grimly. We're estimating close to $250,000 in laundered equity. The board operated like a cartel, ostensibly for community enrichment, but in practice, it was a loop of self-dealing. He slid a photo across the table. It showed Sharon standing in front of a lakeside property, one I'd always assumed belonged to a retired dentist named Greg. Apparently, Greg had never existed. Curtis continued, "We've subpoenaed banking records. Her accounts are tied to a shell company registered 2 counties over. That's where most of the HOA's beautification grants ended up." I stared at the photo for a long moment. "And the rest of the board," he tapped a folder. "2 of them have already flipped. They're cooperating. The 3rd tried to flee the state last night. Got picked up at a bus station in Boone with a suitcase full of burner phones and HOA petty cash." I couldn't help but laugh low and disbelieving. "They really thought no one would look twice." Curtis gave a thin smile. "They got comfortable." "You made them uncomfortable." The following week, subpoenas started flying. I heard from a few neighbors who'd once ignored my warnings. Now they were attending town hall meetings, filing formal complaints, and in at least one case, contacting attorneys to recover dues they'd paid under false pretenses. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth was doing all the work for me. Then came the call from the county commission. They wanted me to speak at the upcoming public forum on housing policy. I'd never set foot in a government building unless I had to renew a registration or pay taxes, but this felt different. I showed up in boots and denim, not interested in dressing for people who'd never set foot past the pavement. The chamber was packed. Reporters, homeowners, even a few state officials lined the benches. When they called my name, I walked up to the mic and looked out over the room. No script. Just the truth. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I'm a man who lives in a cabin and minds his own business. But when a group of neighbors turns into a private government with no checks, no accountability, and no respect for the law, they stop being neighbors. They become predators. And what happened in Pinebrooke wasn't an accident. It was greed dressed up as community. I paused, letting the silence sit. If you want to stop this from happening again, the answer isn't more rules. It's transparency. Require audits, require public votes on expansions. Make it illegal to change boundary lines without notifying every affected property. And make sure anyone running an HOA understands they don't own the people. They serve them. I stepped back. The room stayed quiet for a beat, then applause broke out. Afterward, a man in a worn marine jacket approached me. Said his HOA had started pulling similar stunts. He wanted copies of the filings from my case. I gave him everything I had. That's how it spread. Not lawsuits knowledge, word of mouth, evidence. People realized they weren't alone. And the next time an HOA tried to bully someone off their land, they were met not with silence but with records, statutes, and resistance. As for Sharon, she was eventually indicted on 7 counts, including wire fraud and falsifying public documents. Her trial was set for the fall. If convicted, she'd be looking at real time, not just fines. I never heard from her again, but I didn't need to. Her empire of paperwork had collapsed under the one thing it couldn't survive: facts, and the land she tried to commandeer, it stood exactly where it always had, unmoved, untamed. Mine. A month after the court ruling, the woods around my cabin were quieter than they had been in years. Not silent nature never is, but peaceful. No more uninvited inspections. No more strangers snapping pictures from subs. Just wind in the treetops and the occasional rustle of deer in the brush. The air even smelled different, like the land itself had exhaled. But just because the HOA was dissolved didn't mean the mess was over. Early one morning, my landline rang. Only a handful of people even had the number. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mr. Madsen," said a crisp voice, "this is Special Agent Breck from the State Bureau of Investigation. I need to speak with you in person." "About the audit?" "No," she said. "About what was behind the audit." She arrived an hour later in a government-issued sedan, plainclothes but with a badge clipped to her belt. She was in her late 30s, hair in a tight braid, eyes sharp and unreadable. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Do you recognize this?" she asked, holding out a photo of a rusted trailer tucked into a clearing thick with pine. "Yeah," I said. "That's on the ridge trail north of here, about 20 minutes on foot. Property's been abandoned for years." "Until 6 months ago," she said. That's when Sharon Aller listed it as a community storage facility on HOA filings. She claimed it was used for equipment and seasonal supplies. Was it? No, it was used to store illegal surveillance equipment, she said. Hidden trail cams, long-range microphones, license plate readers, half of it unregistered. I stared at her. "Why? That's what we're figuring out, but it gets worse." She opened a file folder and laid out a series of documents, purchase orders, receipts, all traced back to HOA funds. Among them was a purchase for a cellular signal interceptor. Another for a thermal drone, none of it legal for private citizens. "You're telling me they were spying on residents?" "Not just residents," she said. "We found logs." They'd been monitoring county inspectors, contractors, even law enforcement. Anyone who might pose a threat to their control. Most of it was stored on a remote server registered to a dummy LLC. "We seized it last week." I leaned against the porch rail, trying to wrap my head around it. "They built a surveillance network using HOA money." "Yes, and it looks like they were using it to manipulate property values and influence sales." "We're investigating connections between the board and 2 real estate investors, both of whom purchased multiple homes in the area shortly after residents were fined into foreclosure." I shook my head. "So they weren't just greedy, they were organized," she nodded. "Organized and deliberate. And the only reason we even caught it is because of your case. That forged boundary map led us to a backdoor in their filing system. From there, everything unraveled." She handed me a card. "You may be contacted as a witness. We've already made 3 arrests. More are coming." I watched her drive away, the weight of what she'd said settling in like dense fog. It wasn't just about evicting me. They'd been trying to build a miniature empire, and I'd nearly been collateral damage. Later that week, I was called to testify before the state's Ethics and Housing Committee. I wasn't used to suits or microphones, but I stood in front of them anyway, not as a victim, but as a warning. They didn't need permission, I told the room. They just needed no one to notice. And for a long time, no one did. One of the committee members, a silver-haired woman with a notepad full of scribbles, asked, "Why do you think they targeted your property specifically?" I answered honestly. "Because I didn't fit. I didn't fall in line, and I didn't want to." That made me dangerous to them. The room was quiet. Then another voice spoke up, a younger man, maybe mid-30s, who looked more like a teacher than a politician. "Mr. Madsen, what would you recommend we do going forward?" I didn't hesitate. "Mandatory transparency. Third-party audits for any HOA over a certain size. Criminal penalties for false filings. And no HOA should ever have the authority to redraw boundaries without county oversight." The committee recorded everything. I walked out without shaking any hands. A week later, the story made the state papers. "HOA surveillance scandal exposed," the headline read. Beneath it, Sharon's mugshot, eyes hollow, the tight bun gone. The article detailed the charges: wire fraud, misuse of public funds, unlawful surveillance, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. But the part that made my phone ring off the hook came a few paragraphs down. The state attorney general had announced a full review of HOA oversight laws. What started in Pinebrooke wasn't going to stay there. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years came out of the woodwork. Some apologized for ignoring the signs. Others shared stories of harassment, fines, and late-night visits from mysterious compliance officers who had no badges and left no names. One man, a mechanic named Ray who'd lost his home the year before, visited my cabin with a box of old letters. They were all from the HOA: warnings, threats, fines. He'd kept them for some reason, even after the foreclosure. I helped him turn them over to the investigators. 2 weeks later, the buyers of his former home were subpoenaed. Turns out they were linked to Sharon's cousin. By the time summer rolled in, the state had filed civil suits to reclaim illegally acquired properties. Ray got his house back. Others got settlements. The people who thought they'd lost everything started to realize they'd only been robbed, and now they had a path to reclaim it. I kept to myself, mostly, cleared the trail behind the cabin, repaired the old dock, reassembled the fire pit that had been dismantled by the compliance committee a year earlier. Every piece I put back into place felt like a small reversal of everything they'd tried to erase. Then, one afternoon, a state trooper arrived with a letter. It wasn't a summons. It was a commendation from the Attorney General's office, a formal recognition for civic integrity and contribution to the exposure of systemic abuse in private governance. I didn't hang it. I slid it into a drawer with the deed to the cabin, but I kept the envelope. It reminded me that one voice, when loud enough, could break walls. The final chapter came when the state passed the Pinebrooke Act, named not after the HOA, but after the scandal. It limited HOA authority, required judicial review for annexation, and criminalized submission of falsified documents in land disputes. It passed unanimously. I didn't attend the signing. I didn't want a camera in my face or a podium under my hands. I stayed home, grilled venison, and sat with my boots up while the radio played the news. They tried to evict me, I said aloud to no one but the trees. Now they're gone, and I'm still here. And that was enough.